1963, Queen Elizabeth Barracks, Strensall, Yorkshire, a firing range on the edge of the North York Moors. 9 British Army armourers carry a machine gun to the firing point. They bolt it to its tripod, fill the water jacket, and link the first of what will be many thousands of ammunition belts. The weapon they are about to test weighs 28 pounds without water. Its barrel is wrapped in a corrugated steel jacket that holds 7.5 imperial pints of liquid. A rubber hose runs from the muzzle to a battered 2-gallon condensing can sitting in the mud beside the tripod. Canvas belts, each holding 250 rounds and stretching 20 feet long, are stacked in wooden boxes as far as the eye can see. It looked like a museum piece. It looked like something dragged out of a trench from 1916. By 1963, every major army on Earth had moved to air-cooled, general-purpose machine guns that were lighter, faster, and easier to carry. This water-cooled relic belonged in a glass case, not on a firing range. And yet, over the next 7 days and 7 nights, these 9 men would fire approximately 5 million rounds through this single weapon without stopping. When they pulled it from the tripod and carried it back to the workshop, they measured every critical dimension. Not a single measurement had moved outside factory specification. It would go on to serve the British Army for 56 consecutive years, fight in 2 world wars and a dozen smaller conflicts, equip more than 50 nations, and earn a reputation for reliability that no firearm in history has matched. Its official designation was the gun machine Vickers, .303 inch, Mark I. Soldiers simply called it the Vickers, and it was the most dependable weapon Britain ever made. To understand why the Vickers existed, you need to understand the problem the British Army faced at the turn of the 20th century. In 1884, an American inventor named Hiram Maxim, working from a small workshop in Hatton Garden, London, had built the world's first fully automatic machine gun. His design was revolutionary. It used the recoil energy of each fired cartridge to eject the spent case, chamber the next round, and fire again, achieving a rate of 600 rounds per minute from a single barrel. The British Army adopted the Maxim gun and used it across the empire from the Sudan to South Africa. But the Maxim had a problem. It was enormously heavy. The complete system, gun, mount, and water, weighed close to 60 pounds for the gun body alone, and the sled mount pushed the total beyond 130 pounds. Moving it forward under fire required teams of men and frequently pack animals. For a weapon that was supposed to support advancing infantry, this was a serious limitation. In 1896, the Vickers Company purchased Maxim's firm outright. After Maxim himself departed the board in 1911, Vickers engineers redesigned his gun from the inside out. They inverted the toggle lock mechanism so that it broke downward instead of upward, which allowed a significantly smaller receiver. They replaced heavy brass components with steel and aluminium. They swapped the brass water jacket for lighter corrugated steel and added a muzzle booster to ensure reliable cycling. The result cut the gun body weight from roughly 40 pounds to 28, a reduction of 30%, without sacrificing a single round per minute of firing rate. On the 26th of November 1912, the British Army formally adopted it. But adoption and availability were two very different things. When war broke out in August 1914, Britain possessed just 109 Vickers guns in the entire army and 2 in the Royal Navy, supplemented by 1,800 older Maxim guns that were already considered obsolete. Production at the Crayford Works in Kent was roughly 1 gun per day. The early wartime price was £175 per weapon. Vickers faced accusations of war profiteering. The price was eventually forced down to £66.15. By 1918, output had reached 39,000 guns in a single year. Over 119,000 were eventually produced. The weapon itself was a masterpiece of practical engineering. It fired the standard British .303 cartridge at a cyclic rate of 450 to 600 rounds per minute. Ammunition was fed from 250-round canvas belts, loaded by hand, entering the feed block from the right side. A 6-man crew operated each gun. Number 1 was the gunner and team leader. Number 2 controlled the belt feed. Number 3 managed ammunition and water supply. Numbers 4 through 6 carried supplies and served as replacements because every man was trained to fire. The water cooling system was the Vickers' greatest advantage and the reason for its legendary endurance. The barrel sat inside a sealed jacket filled with water. After approximately 600 to 750 rounds of rapid fire, the water began to boil. Steam rose through a tube near the muzzle, travelled through the rubber hose into the condensing can, and returned to liquid. This served 2 purposes. It concealed the gun's position by eliminating the telltale steam plume that could draw enemy fire, and it allowed the water to be recycled back into the jacket, meaning the gun could theoretically fire forever, limited only by barrel life and ammunition supply. A trained crew could swap a worn barrel in under 2 minutes. Effective range was 2,000 metres in direct fire. With specialised boat-tailed Mark 8Z ammunition, fired at high angles using clinometers and aiming discs, the Vickers could deliver indirect plunging fire at targets up to 4,500 yards away. Bullets arriving at that distance were subsonic. The men being hit never heard the shots that killed them. Now, Before we get into where this weapon actually fought, if you are enjoying this deep dive into British military engineering, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. The Vickers' first great test came at the very start of the Great War. On the 23rd of August 1914, at the Belgian town of Mons, the British Expeditionary Force met the advancing German First Army. At Nemi Bridge, the 4th Battalion Royal Fusiliers held a critical crossing with their machine guns. Lieutenant Maurice Dees commanded the gun section, and despite being wounded 5 times, he continued to direct fire until he collapsed and died at his post. He was awarded the Victoria Cross posthumously, the first of the entire war. After Dees fell, Private Sidney Godley took over a single gun and held the bridge alone for 2 hours, buying time for his battalion to withdraw before throwing the gun into the canal to prevent its capture. He too received the Victoria Cross, the first awarded to a private soldier in the conflict. 2 months later, at Hollebeck in Belgium on the 31st of October 1914, Sepoy Khudadad Khan of the 129th Duke of Connaught's own Baluchis kept firing his Vickers after all 5 of his crewmates had been killed. He was wounded and left for dead but survived. He became the first Indian soldier to receive the Victoria Cross, but the action that would define the Vickers forever came 2 years later, during the Battle of the Somme. On the 24th of August 1916, the 100th Machine Gun Company of the Machine Gun Corps, commanded by Captain Graham Seaton Hutchison, positioned 6 Vickers guns in Savoy Trench with a clear line of fire toward German positions at High Wood. At 5:45 in the evening they opened fire. What followed was 12 continuous hours of sustained barrage fire, the guns elevated on their tripods and firing indirectly over the heads of advancing British infantry, raining bullets down on the German positions like miniature artillery. According to the war diary of the 100th Machine Gun Company, signed by Hutchison himself, those 6 guns fired 99,500 rounds over the course of that night. By 7:40 in the evening, water was running critically short. Urgent messages were sent to the rear for more ammunition and more water. Men of the Highland Light Infantry were pressed into service as ammunition carriers. When cooling water ran out entirely, soldiers resorted to urinating into the water jackets to keep the guns firing. According to accounts from veterans, not a single gun failed. Hutchison later claimed the figure was closer to 1 million rounds from 10 guns, and that version became the famous story repeated in virtually every account of the Vickers for over a century. However, a peer-reviewed study published in the British Journal for Military History in 2019, authored by Dr. Richard Willis and Richard Fisher, examined the original war diaries and concluded that the true figure was approximately 1/10 of the legendary claim. 6 guns, 99,500 rounds, still an extraordinary achievement for August 1916, but a fraction of the myth. German prisoners captured after the barrage reported that the effect had been annihilating. Sergeant P. Dean of the company won a 5-franc prize for his team's performance during the action. The real story does not need exaggeration. It speaks for itself. The Machine Gun Corps, formed in October 1915 to professionalize machine gun employment, would eventually grow to 158,000 officers and men. Its casualty rate was devastating, 62,000 casualties, including roughly 12,500 killed. Soldiers called it the Suicide Club. In the Second World War, the Vickers served in dedicated machine gun battalions, concentrated in 4 infantry regiments: the Middlesex Regiment, the Manchester Regiment, the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers, and the Cheshire Regiment. At Dunkirk in 1940, large quantities of guns were lost, prompting emergency purchases of over 7,000 Colt-produced Vickers guns from the United States. On the 6th of June, 1944, the 2nd Battalion Middlesex Regiment landed on Sword Beach with the 3rd Infantry Division, their Vickers guns providing sustained covering fire across the beachhead. The 8th Battalion Middlesex Regiment fought through Normandy with the 43rd Wessex Division, including the brutal fighting around Hill 112 near Malto, where machine gun platoons fired continuous barrages to suppress German counterattacks for days on end. In Burma, Chindit columns of the 4th Battalion Border Regiment carried sections of 2 Vickers guns through some of the most punishing jungle terrain on Earth. In Korea, Australian Vickers crews fired over 60,000 rounds in 5 days during the Battle of the Imjin River in April 1951. When cooling water froze in the Korean winter, crews added antifreeze to the jackets to prevent them from splitting. At the Gloucestershire Regiment's last stand on the Imjin, the decision to withdraw was partly driven by having no water left for the guns. At the end, men were using urine to cool them, just as their grandfathers had done at High Wood 35 years earlier. One veteran's devotion captured the relationship between soldier and weapon better than any official report. Private George Coppard, who had enlisted in 1914 at the age of 16 by lying about his age, served with the Machine Gun Corps at Loos, the Somme, Arras, and Cambrai. He later wrote that devotion to the Vickers became the most important thing in his life for the rest of his army career. At Cambrai, a German bullet severed his femoral artery. A comrade saved his life with a shoelace tourniquet. Coppard survived the war. His love for the gun did not fade. On paper, the German MG42 looked superior. Its cyclic rate of 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute dwarfed the Vickers 450 to 600. It was lighter, more portable, and could be carried by a single soldier, but the MG42 was air-cooled. After 250 rounds of sustained fire, its barrel had to be changed. After several changes, the gun needed to rest. It could not fire continuously for 12 hours. The Vickers could. Against the American M1917 Browning, the comparison was closer. Both were water-cooled, belt-fed, and designed for the sustained fire role. The Browning was somewhat heavier, but equally reliable. Neither gun clearly outperformed the other. Against the Bren gun, which briefly threatened to replace it, the Vickers proved irreplaceable. The Bren's 30-round magazine and air-cooled barrel made it superb for section-level firepower, but utterly inadequate for sustained barrage fire. The army tried. The Bren could not do it. The Vickers came back. The Vickers was formally retired from British service on the 30th of March 1968, replaced by the L7 variant of the FNMAG general-purpose machine gun. It received a full military funeral at Bisley. According to the Norfolk Tank Museum, many who had served with the weapon were reduced to tears. Over 50 nations had operated it. India and Pakistan reportedly held Vickers guns in active reserve as recently as 2012. Total production exceeded 119,000 guns across factories in Britain, Australia, and the United States. 1963, Queen Elizabeth Barracks, Strensall, Yorkshire. 9 armourers stand in a firing pit surrounded by mountains of empty brass, shredded canvas belts, and the wreckage of wooden ammunition boxes. A deep cleft has been carved into the stop butts where 5 million bullets have torn the earth apart over 7 continuous days. They unbolt the gun from its tripod and carry it back to the workshop. It was heavy. It required 6 men to operate. It needed water when water was the one thing a battlefield never had enough of. It belonged to an era of trench warfare that the modern army had spent decades trying to forget, and yet it worked. It worked in the mud of the Somme, in the deserts of North Africa, on the beaches of Normandy, in the jungles of Burma, and in the frozen hills of Korea. It worked when men urinated into its water jacket because there was nothing else. It worked when every other gun on the battlefield had overheated and stopped. Other nations built machine guns that fired faster. Other nations built machine guns that weighed less. No nation on earth built a machine gun that simply refused to stop.